Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to the fifth plenary session of the Manama Dialogue, the second of today, on the theme defense, diplomacy, and modernization in the Middle East. We are the International Institute for Strategic Studies, so we do address the hard defense and security issues as well, even as we span our intellectual reach into human security and the important effects of climate change on regional stability and all the geoeconomic trends that affect peace and prosperity. But we are, as you know, the authors also of the military balance, the only well-regarded unclassified assessment of the installed inventory of 171 countries in the world. We began it in 1959. It was only 16 pages long. It only covered the NATO and Warsaw Pact countries. Now the text version is about 650 pages long in tiny font. But much more importantly, in the last 3 years, we've created an agile defense database that includes much more information and analysis that we could include in the book itself, including with artificial intelligence, software, and algorithms that help do defense economic forecasting, and we can identify defense supply chains in it as well. And it is a platform that is changing the nature of defense analysis. And I rather like thinking that the IISS Military Balance Plus tool is to defense analysis what the Bloomberg terminal is to financial analysis. And we're glad that a number of defense ministries around the world are adopting it. Certainly a number of defense companies are. And for us, it also hugely accelerates our capacity to provide defense analysis for the government and private sector constituencies with which we engage. If you look at the book, it might take you 4.5 hours to get yourself the answer to the question of who has certain types of helicopters. It takes about 18 to 20 seconds if you use the database, and as a consequence, if you know it'll take 4 hours to get the answer of the question, you won't look at the book. But if you know it'll take 20 seconds to get a good answer, you might ask of the database about a dozen questions, and as a result be, I hope, better informed, but also develop better policy. A number of countries around the world, as we've heard from Lord Sedwell this morning, are engaged in defense reviews, are looking again at the nature of their defense postures, examining the technologies that can change the nature of defense activity. The United Kingdom is heavily engaged in an integrated review at present. There was concern that there might not be more than a single-year settlement for the defense budget. We look like we've gotten a little bit more cash in the bank there. The United States doesn't worry too much about cash in the bank at present, but it's certainly interested in examining, as it were, to coin a phrase, bang for the buck, and looking to see how it can integrate new technologies in order to make more effective and precise its public security good that it provides throughout the world, and not least in this region. So we're really excited about this session because it goes to, as it were, the core competence and interest of the IISS, and will be addressed first by General Sir Nick Carter, who's the Chief of the Defence Staff of the UK, and will then be asking Admiral Sam Paparo of the US Fifth Fleet here. And we also expect to receive shortly Major General Huneiti, the Jordanian chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's currently in a meeting with His Highness Sheikh Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Bahrain's national security advisor, but efforts are being made, I'm advised, to get him swiftly into this room to join us elegantly on time when it becomes his turn to speak. And with that, may I ask General Sir Nick Carter to address the Manama Dialogue.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be speaking here for my first time at this Manama Dialogue. It is a really important annual event, and great credit, I think, to the Kingdom of Bahrain and to IISS for still making it work in, let's face it, some weird times. The COVID-19 pandemic is magnifying existing global trends. We can only speculate on the long-term repercussions. But as a soldier, I would observe that there is a significant risk that an economic crisis and a health crisis could also lead to a security crisis, as it has done in the past. History may not repeat itself, but it does have a rhythm. And even before COVID-19, the strategic context was complex and dynamic, with the defining condition being one of chronic instability. We are living in an era of constant competition between great powers and would-be great powers. This competition is being conducted below the threshold of what we would call war, utilizing new weapons, tactics, and techniques that have been made possible by the pervasiveness of information and the ever-increasing pace of technological change. Together, these are changing the character of warfare and of politics. This is overlaid by the enduring threat from violent extremism, which feeds on failed states, fuels population migration, and provides a cover for serious organized crime. All of this is compounded by populism and nationalism. In September, we launched a new integrated operating concept for our armed forces, which sets out our approach to the use of the military instrument in the strategic context I've described. Now, this region understands global strategic competition only too well. Its geostrategic position, its natural resources, and its strategic choke points have long been important considerations for great powers. The US remains the dominant power, but as the Asia-Pacific beckons, so other powers are seeking opportunities, and the region's nations are understandably coming to terms with the need for new partnerships. In the case of China, the Belt and Road Initiative is steadily expanding Chinese interests and influence, leveraging its economic heft and its defense industry in the region and further afield. Russia, meanwhile, is taking advantage of opportunities that are presented. We've, of course, seen this in Syria, where the use of proxies and private security companies, such as the Wagner Group, equipped with modern Russian equipment, has changed the facts on the ground. Now, there are more differences than similarities between Moscow and Beijing in terms of intentions, economic heft, and the challenge they pose to global security. But a key similarity, which they share, I think, with other authoritarian regimes, is that they see the strategic context as a continuous struggle in which non-military and military instruments are used, unconstrained by any distinction between peace and war. They believe that they are already engaged in an intense form of conflict that is predominantly political rather than kinetic. Their strategy of political warfare is designed to undermine cohesion, to erode economic, political, and social resilience, and to compete for strategic advantage in key regions of the world. Their goal is to win without going to war. As Sun Tzu observed, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So they seek to achieve their objectives while ensuring that their actions do not prompt a warfighting response. They have thoughtfully studied our Western way of war. They've identified our vulnerabilities and modernized their own capabilities to target them. And significantly, they have proliferated much of their technology to others, not least in this region. None of this is helped by the demise of the traditional diplomatic instruments that have provided some measure of arms control and counter-proliferation, with the last arms control treaty, New START, potentially ending next February. The upshot is that the threat of escalation, and therefore of miscalculation, is clear and present. And as the competition for resources, bases, and partners intensifies, so the risks increase. Take the Horn of Africa, for example. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute has recently produced a report on the Horn, which reveals the extent to which the region has experienced a substantial increase in the number and size of foreign military deployments since 2001. a wide range of regional and international security actors are currently operating in the Horn, and the foreign military installations include land-based facilities and naval forces on permanent or regular deployment. The most visible aspect of this presence is the proliferation of military facilities in littoral areas along the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. And there's been a build-up of naval forces, notably around the Bab el-Mandab, at the entrance to the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. And of course, Libya is another example where competition between external actors is playing out. The US Institute for Peace has written that aside from Turkey's support for the GNA and Russian and UAE support for the LNA, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Italy, Sudan, Chad, Jordan, and Qatar have all been involved to one degree or another. And Turkey and Russia have become very close to direct military action, albeit with proxies and private military companies at the tip of the Russian spear. There is a clear trend towards military action that uses arm's-length instruments like drones, private military companies, and proxies to provide a plausible degree of deniability that enables intervention without the risk of entanglement. This is the complex geostrategic context that our new integrated operating concept seeks to address. It has several ideas. First, it recognizes that in a world where protagonists have blurred the distinction between peace and war, home and away, state and non-state, and virtual and reality, it is necessary to revisit deterrence theory. It adds a fifth C, that of competition, to the traditional deterrence model of comprehension, credibility, capability, and of course communication. Competition involves the dynamic management of one's deterrent posture below the threshold of war in order to deter war and to prevent one's rivals from achieving their objectives in fait accompli strategies or by freezing conflicts, as we've seen in the Crimea, Ukraine, Libya, the South China Sea, and elsewhere. This competitive posture needs to be more engaged and forward deployed. Armed forces much more in use rather than dedicated solely for contingency, with training and exercising being delivered as operations. It will involve capacity building and engagement with those who request support. This could include partnered operations against common threats, particularly with violent extremism. And in doing so, from our perspective, it doubles down on our key advantage, our network of like-minded allies and partners, and long-term military-to-military relationships. The second important idea in this concept is that we cannot afford to operate in silos. We must be integrated with allies, as I have described, but also across government, fusing all of the instruments of statecraft within a compelling narrative, but particularly across the military instrument. Effective integration of the operational domains of maritime, land, air, space, and cyber achieves a multi-domain effect that adds up to far more than simply the sum of the parts. Armed forces that achieve multi-domain integration will have mastered modern war. And this brings me to the third idea, which is how we will modernize. We are charting a direction of travel from an industrial age of platforms to an information age of systems. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's recent announcement of a significant increase in UK defence spending enables us to plan this modernisation journey with confidence. Warfare is increasingly about a competition between hiding and finding. It will be enabled at every level by a digital backbone or combat cloud into which all sensors, effectors, and deciders will be plugged. It requires us to embrace combinations of information-centric technologies, but predicting these combinations will be challenging. So we intend to place an emphasis on experimentation by allocating resources, force structure, training, and exercise activity to stimulate innovation with a responsive commercial function at the leading edge, because this will enable adaptive exploitation as opportunities become clear. Importantly, in adjusting our posture, as I have described, we will not lose sight of the fact that the nature of war never changes. It is always visceral, it is always violent, and it always involves interaction between people. In the final analysis, one has to go close and personal with one's enemy. So while this integrated operating concept places a premium on competition and on operating, it also places a premium on adaptability, the ability to adapt to warfight. And this, in turn, emphasizes the importance of our people, who are always, I would suggest, the adaptive edge in all armed forces. Now, what does this mean for our military posture in the region? In 2016, the then Prime Minister, Theresa May, observed, "We have a rich history on which to build, from the very first treaties in the mid-17th century, which saw the East India Company reach agreements in British trade and a military presence in Oman, to our deep partnership as Cold War allies. The UK has been proudly at the forefront of a relationship between the Gulf and the West that has been the bedrock of our shared prosperity and security." In the same speech, she also set out ways in which the UK would step up its relationship in the region, building relationships based on true partnership. Since then, the Royal Navy's HMS Montrose is forward deployed here in Bahrain, alongside the Mine Countermeasures Force. These vessels are committed to the International Maritime Security Contract, IMSC, that maintains freedom of navigation for commercial ships throughout the Gulf. In the air domain, we are contributing to the air defense of Saudi Arabia, and we are currently exercising Typhoons with the Qatari Air Force, which has pilots embedded in the Royal Air Force's 12 Squadron. We have a joint defense agreement with Oman, where we train together at a new joint training facility on the coast at Ras Madraka. The neighbouring Duqm port has become an invaluable logistics base that will facilitate Royal Navy deployments in the Indian Ocean, and its dry dock facility is capable of supporting our 2 new aircraft carriers. Together, Ras Madraka and Duqm provide the basis for genuine multi-domain integration. And we take much value in the close network we've formed with the GCC, Egyptian, and Jordanian Chiefs of Defence in what we call our Dragon Group, after its first meeting that took place on board HMS Dragon, a Type 45 destroyer. We use this to share our analysis of mutual capability and force development. To conclude, in this era of constant competition, it is not just across geographies that we need to operate and fight together, but also across all 5 operational domains: land, sea, air, cyber, and space, and maritime, and both above and below the threshold of conflict. But most importantly, this must be done with allies and like-minded partners if we are to be able, collectively, to assure the security, stability, and prosperity of regions like the Gulf and the Middle East more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief of Defence Staff. Really excellent, by the way, to have had 2 UK speakers this morning who were able to remind our friends in this region of the enduring strategic connection here. I remember, I think it was December 2014, both Philip Hammond and Michael Fallon attended the Manama Dialogue, and at about 11:30 in the evening on the Friday night, in a room just about 100 paces from here, signed the facilities agreement that enabled the UK to have a more persistent naval presence here. Also really helpful to hear from you the realities of remote warfare, drones, private military companies, proxies that are, of course, felt very significantly in this region. And thank you so much for your phrase, the information age of systems, and the realities that you always have to compete nowadays in the combat cloud. As a footnote, I might just note that after some brief delay a week or so ago, it was formally announced in the UK that a national cyber force had been established that does, of course, quite uniquely integrate the capabilities of GCHQ with the British military in a whole-of-government approach, as it were, to competition in that space. Admiral Paparo, thank you very much for addressing the Manama Dialogue. We look forward to the U.S. Perspective, if I can put it that way, but more importantly also the perspective of the Fifth Fleet here in Bahrain.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and to all of the delegates here. First, a very great thanks to Dr. John Chipman, and also very honored to share the stage with General Nick Carter, and most grateful to Sir Tom Beckett and to all the staff of the ISS, and most of all, most grateful to the Kingdom of Bahrain for hosting this affair. And for hosting me here in my home here in Bahrain that I and my family love so much. General Nick didn't leave me much room to talk here. He covered philosophically a great deal, and it was very much a synopsis of a lot of the themes that we've gone through over the course of the last 3 days. So I will do my very level best to try to just underscore a couple of important points with respect to defense diplomacy, modernization, and the Middle East. First, as a Anglophone and an Anglophile, I wondered if there was a missing Oxford comma in, is it defense diplomacy or is it defense and diplomacy and modernization? So Sir John added some ambiguity to that by pausing between those for about a half of a beat. But I'll try to discuss defense diplomacy and modernization in the context of this region that is so very important to the world. And so strategically, in terms of the military instrument, your strategic education is probably complete if you read Sun Tzu and you read Clausewitz, and those were consistent themes in General Nick Carter's talk as well. And first, it is that the nature of warfare never changes, and the second is that the character of warfare is always changing, and that has been a consistent theme from Minister Kang, who talked about the changing shape of warfare, from Lord Sedwell, who talked about the third industrial revolution and its effects, and in General Carter's very prescient talk. And on this topic of defense diplomacy and modernization, there is the tidy and available heuristic to think about this in terms of just military sales, in the sense that perhaps our technology can be our tactics and can solve our problems. And this, we all know, is not the case. This model of thinking takes our cohesion and our multilateralism, and it converts it into transactional, if not exploitative, relationships among ourselves. And so I will quote a third philosopher, and he's a Yankee philosopher, Mr. John Boyd, Colonel John Boyd, U.S. Air Force, a fighter pilot like myself, who thought of warfare as operating through the prism of people, concepts, and machines, or people, ideas, and machines. And I think that this is a critical way to look, a critical prism to look through the context of what we're talking about, which is defense diplomacy and modernization. Is that, and it was a note that General Carter made as a particular point of emphasis, which is that people are the center of warfare, and as a corollary are the center of defense and diplomacy, warfare being the continuation of policy by other means. And it's why we do it, it's how we do it, and it must be a set of first principles. When we talk about the changing character of warfare, we see that ways where ideas and or technology have changed the character of warfare, whether it was the cult of the offensive that emerged out of the Napoleonic War, or the massive fires through breech-loading weapons that emerged during the First War, to the combined arms that emerged during the Second World War. With the pace of change, we see that we people must pace this advanced technology by modernizing ourselves, modernizing our concepts, and modernizing our equipment. And this must move apace with the other instruments of national power. What Lord Sedwill has coined as the fusion strategy, and what we've called in the United States the comprehensive strategy, all in the same. And so keying on these themes and keying on the themes of the fact that our multilateralism, our restoring our coalitions in order to uphold the rules-based international order is particularly important. And it is neither particular to the Middle East, nor North America, nor any of the 6 inhabited continents on the world, but is in fact a worldwide mandate to pace this for the safety and the security of the people whom we all defend here in this room. And here I am very proud to say, we, here in the Kingdom of Bahrain are hosted a couple of absolutely unique military constructs that operate through this prism of people, ideas, and machines. And I would like to explicate that a little bit here for you today. And the first is the Combined Maritime Force. It is a construct that has endured for the last 20 years. It is oriented against threats that the entire world can agree on as a national mandate, that being counter-terror, counter-illicit trafficking, counter-narcotics, and counter-piracy, scourges that absolutely threaten the free flow of commerce through the world's waterways. And I needn't tell everyone here that this is the locus of some of the absolute key waterways to the world, the nexus of the world's most populous continents, and through which much of the maritime traffic flows. And this Combined Maritime Force, with its emphasis on deter, develop, and reassure, and I'll tell you very proudly that just about 24 hours ago, USS Ralph Johnson, a vessel under the command of the Combined Task Force 150 commander, Rear Admiral Al Faqih of the Royal Naval Forces, interdicted a ton of hashish, and it sounds trifle, but 33 grams of an unidentified white powder as well. And in the last weeks, this force has interdicted tons and tons of narcotics that otherwise would have gone into the veins of young people, destroying minds, destroying families, and fueling and financing terrorism throughout the world. This 33-nation coalition, and you heard the Canadian minister proudly say that they'll be assuming command of that force in January. This 33-nation coalition, unique to the world, with officers, with sailors, with soldiers, and with vessels spanning all 6 inhabited continents in the world, 33 nations participating in this construct every day. This builds a network, a community of practice, a means by which we modernize our ideas, our operational concepts, how we connect effort across all of the domains that General Carter cited all together. It informs them among all of the nations, all of whom must modernize against a mission set that we can all agree on. And it's this community practice is oriented towards the international rules-based order that has been a consistent theme throughout this great symposium. And then General Nick also mentioned the International Maritime Security Construct, and this mandate is in response to state-based interdiction of shipping, threatening freedom of navigation here in the Straits of Hormuz, and to another extent in the Straits of Bab al-Mandeb. critical waterways for the world's economic engine and for the well-being of the entire world. And so, as we have this discussion on modernization, let's transcend the notion that modernization is just equipment. Let's transcend the notion that defense diplomacy is just the transactional exchange of money and equipment, and that technology can be our tactics and can solve our problems. Look at this through the focus of people, concepts, and machines. Let us understand that modernization is a mandate. It's a dictum that we must all approach, because the rates of technological change are so very great, has been explicated throughout this entire conference. And let's appreciate that unique in the entire world, here at the crossroads of the world, it's being executed day in and day out. And ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those remarks, and also in particular for two maxims that I noted. Modernization is not just about equipment. Defense diplomacy is not just about arms sales. So we'll adopt those as things to repeat regularly for if people think too narrowly about either of these issues. I'm going to ask as many people as wish to shortly take the floor as we await whether we'll have a third set of remarks from this podium. But as I see the scorecard or dance card add up, I'd like to ask a question of each of you before we go to the floor. It's on the same country, but slightly different questions. I posed actually this question to Secretary Pompeo on Friday night, so I'll just phrase it slightly differently for you, General Sir Nick Carter. About a year ago, the IISS did a long study on Iran's influence networks in the Middle East, and it was the first really comprehensive taxonomy of the variety of groups with which Iran engaged in Lebanon, in Yemen, in the Gulf region, in Syria and Iraq, and even into Afghanistan and Pakistan, or from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And the conclusion of that analysis was that Iran considers its influence networks as its prime strategic asset, arguably more important than its nuclear weapons program or its ballistic missile program. And the reason is that it is that strategic asset, its influence networks in the Middle East, that day in, day out, week in, week out, change the effective balance of power in the Middle East. That's what hurts. And so, since you spoke so eloquently about these new forms of warfare, what would you imagine is the right strategy for the United Kingdom and its like-minded partners in the region to combat these influence networks and proxy networks? You first, and then I'll have one for you. So.
No, thanks, John. And I think that's a very prescient observation. I mean, to my mind, it's home and away. And at home, I think it is fundamentally about us reinforcing the alliances that we have and what those alliances stand for. Because ultimately, these networks thrive on ideas, to what Admiral Sam said earlier about people, ideas, and of course, machinery. And it's about how you have a better idea and how that idea essentially achieves the sort of binding effect that your partnerships and your alliances require. So you've got to reinforce the idea. I think you then have to recognize that as the character of warfare and politics have evolved, it is about a battle of narratives. And what you've then got to do, I think, is to discredit the pervasive and nefarious narrative that, of course, their networks depend upon. And I think you have to find a way of undermining that. And, of course, victory these days is a very difficult term to define, but ultimately it's going to be about the side that has the better narrative. And I think that better narrative, based upon the cohesion that you create around it, is the way in which you ultimately combat it. And then, of course, it comes down to using the other instruments of statecraft as well. And we should be in no doubt that where we can call out this nefarious behavior and where our intelligence organizations can identify where they can be effectively targeted, then it's entirely appropriate if those tools and those networks are being used in ways that require us within international law to be able to get after them, then we should do just that. But I think we have to recognize that they do understand very clearly that the character of warfare and politics has changed. and they are playing that back in their approach to the way in which they're trying to achieve their ends in the region.
But gently, just to press you a little bit on that latter point, when the former head of the IRGC stated proudly, we're in Damascus, we're in Baghdad, it wasn't about narrative, it was about a military presence that changed politics in those capitals. Is there a way to shape those outcomes differently?
No, certainly. I mean, I'm not saying it's all about the narrative. I'm saying it's also about understanding you'll need to use the other tools of statecraft to achieve this. But again, they have to be precisely targeted. And if you can identify the nefarious behavior, which gives you the license to be able to target them in a more aggressive fashion, then that's the way one will have to do it. That's how you defend yourself, ultimately. But you've got to win the narrative first.
Thank you very much. And to Sam Paparo, this question, as I said, same country, but slightly different question. Navies are often proud of saying they communicate well with other navies, no matter how challenging the other navies might be. The U.S. Navy has, communication networks with the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea and elsewhere when freedom of navigation is being exerted. And similarly here, we hear often of how the Fifth Fleet does have a dialogue with the Iranian Navy. But I wonder whether you have observed in the last 6 months or so, any different tactics that are being used by the Iranian Navy or by the patrol crafts that they use in order to harass either commercial traffic in the region or to intimidate such formal military deployments that might be in the region, whether against the theme of modernization in defense, whether you are having to reimagine some of your own tactics to deal effectively with any Iranian activity to ensure that there is no escalation that then leads to a misunderstanding that then leads to a conflict.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think I'll have to expand the window of examination in order to really accurately answer the question. Because over the last 6 months, I must say, no, I've not seen a change in behavior in the maritime domain from Iranian forces in the last 6 months. And although the current naval presence is an enhanced naval presence, as it has been since June of 2019 in the wake of the limpet mining in Fujairah Harbor, the attacks on motor vessels Altair, Courageous, Steno and Pero, among other events of aggression in the maritime domain. And at that time, the United States Navy, in concert with the Royal Navy, in concert with the naval forces here, chiefly among Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and Australia, introduced the International Maritime Security Construct in order to execute what is essentially a deterrence by denial scheme, which is that by occupying the maritime commons, we put ourselves, the coalition, in a condition where we can see and expose malign activity, inherently defensive, though having the right of collective self-defense among themselves. And it is within that construct, among others, that in my opinion and in the opinion of my commander, General McKenzie, within the military instrument and at sea among the IRIN and IRGCN, we have achieved an uneasy deterrence. And so that uneasy deterrence is exacerbated by world events and by events along the way. But I have found Iranian activity at sea to be cautious and circumspect and respectful, to not risk unnecessary miscalculation or escalation at sea. There are means by which, among other states and other navies, we communicate. Iran is not a signatory for the Code of Unplanned Encounters at Sea, and accordingly, we rely on just common bridge-to-bridge communication among vessels. And my dictum to my ships and to those ships under my command is for flawlessly professional, unemotional, and disinterested communication. What I mean by disinterested is betraying no emotion other than strict professionalism at sea. And between peerless seamanship, precision, precise communications is how we communicate our intention of a defensive posture, a ready posture. I think you quoted General Mattis earlier. Be polite, be professional, and have a plan to kill everyone in the room. But that's how we conduct ourselves at sea. And I have General Mattis had a few gerunds that spiced up the discussion, but we'll keep it at that for this crowd, family crowd here. So that's how we achieve that objective here at sea, and that's been my observation of them. And I'm not betraying any state secrets by saying that is in fact our posture. It is a stabilizing defensive posture. Thank you for the question, sir.
Thank you very much. I must say you're a very accomplished grammarian. First, it's the Oxford comma, and second, it's reminding us of the distinction my father also reminded us of the difference between being uninterested and being disinterested. He used to tell me a judge is disinterested, but he is certainly not uninterested. It's a question of not having emotion and trying to be neutral where one could and keeping cool. So thank you very much for those distinctions. I'm going to ask for one more question from here that's directed specifically to General Nick Carter. It's from the UK, from the Netherlands, but also from the IISS, from Maya Nowens, who's our expert on Chinese military modernization at the IISS. And she's also been with a team at the IISS creating a digital database with more than 1,400 data points on China's digital Silk Road, including in the Middle East. And our IISS Middle East office and the Arab experts and Arab speakers in our IISS Middle East office really contributed hugely to that. And so she asked this question. General Carter, you highlighted the importance of the digital backbone to defense in the information age. How concerned are you about China's global digital investments, including heavy investment in the Middle East? And how might this impact the UK's defense engagement in this region? I think maybe to put it bluntly, maybe in General Mattis type terms, could the Chinese turn you blind here? Nick Carter.
No, and I talked about the Belt and Road Initiative, but I could equally have talked about the digital Silk Road. I mean, these are going to be significant challenges for us. And when we were talking about people, ideas, and machines, and how defense diplomacy is not simply about selling people things, on the other hand, it is absolutely about making sure that the technological advantage that you have is one that you protect, and it's probably one that you spread. Because when we think about how we're going to manage the challenge of China, it's essentially going to be about a real technological challenge. And that competition and the way in which we create the markets in which we can prevail in that competition is going to be absolutely profound to the future of all of our countries, for what we stand for, but it's also going to be fundamental for our militaries. And when I talk about the digital backbone, the combat cloud being at the heart of how our armed forces need to modernize, it is, of course, broader than that. How we achieve it, that is a challenge, because I think that whilst all of us can see that the future is going to be one based upon information technologies and a combination of information technologies, it is going to be very difficult to work out what that combination looks like. And we're going to have to feel our way, we're going to have to experiment, and we're going to have to work very closely in defense industry terms with the outside world, because this is not something that we have a monopoly on any longer, like perhaps we might have done during the Cold War. and how we do it with allies, and how collectively with allies we reinforce and secure those technologies to give us the edge, the disruptive edge that we need in the future, I think is going to be all of our challenge over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think the question goes right to the heart of something in problem terms that we've got to solve. And we'll be working very closely with our partners to be able to try and achieve the solution to that problem.
Superb. I'll now take 3 or 4 from the room here. Let me start with Amna Ibrahim.
Thank you, Sir John. So I have a question about the combined maritime forces. So it seems that this case has been very, very successful for the region and for the world. It's been a great success story. At the same time, in terms of the leadership positions at CMF, they seem to be historically allotted to Western allies. Even though Western allies have repeatedly emphasized the importance of regional players and other players from the developing world taking control or taking more control of security issues. Does the CMF not serve as a great model to begin to open up that leadership space for regional allies that know the region really well and other global partners from the developing world? It would not only reflect the value-based commitments that the Western allies have, but it would also serve very important strategic goals for Western allies. So when can we see kind of more opening up in terms of those kind of high-level leadership positions? Thank you.
Superb question. Thank you very much. And we'll take, as I said, a few more before coming back to the panel. Fenella McGurty.
Thank you. So this is reflecting upon the more integrated approach that General Carter alluded to. If the UK does move to this more integrated approach, how would you ensure that what currently sits with perhaps multiple agencies does then go into a coordinated common goal? And if you do move toward this, how do you then ensure that some objectives aren't then lost, particularly when it comes to, say, funding priorities? And again, would it then require a reassessment of the UK's strategic framework in the region, and how much do you think this would include the UK's regional partners? Thank you.
And David Gordon.
Yes, I have a question for Admiral Paparo. I'd like your assessment of the degree of operational integration and planning integration between the official Iranian Navy and the IRGC Navy.
Thank you. Rim Montaz.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question about Turkey's perhaps use of hybrid methods. We saw them effectively use drones in Nagorno-Karabakh, but also in northwest Syria, while also using perhaps a very old school approach and tool, which is mercenaries, whether they've sent them to Nagorno-Karabakh in conjunction with drones or in Libya. And I wanted to know, is that a challenge for partners and allies within NATO, and how is that approach perceived?
And could I ask Bastian Giegerick, please?
Thank you very much. My question has been, or was triggered by General Carter's remarks about leaving one paradigm behind, which was a platform-centric paradigm, and moving into a new paradigm. And it seems to me that perhaps a moment of quite high risk is that transition, where the old paradigm is becoming weaker, but you have not yet moved into that new era, so to speak. And I was wondering what his thoughts were on how to manage that risk, what the metrics are to apply, and how he goes about it with a view to the agenda he has outlined for the UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got 4 or 5 questions from the floor, and I'll ask perhaps Sam Paparo to take them first, and then General Carter. And we welcome, of course, General Huneiti to the stage. But we'll maybe take the answer to those questions, so and then proceed to the next round in our discussions. But so did I say Sam first, or did I say you first? Sam, yes. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
So first for Ms. Ibrahim, first, thank you for the question, and we had a very nice engagement in the Young Leaders Forum earlier in the conference too, and I've been most impressed with her intellect, fidelity, and zeal, so much appreciated. First, I'll challenge the assumption that Western powers are in command, and I could follow up with you later on with a full list over the last 20 years, but in my tenure, upon arrival, Task Force 150 was commanded by Admiral Al-Faqih, and as I said just a night ago, he had a great deal of success over the last weeks with French ships and with U.S. ships interdicting traffic. CTF 151, and you'll forgive the alphabet soup of alphanumerics, but the task force that is charged with anti-piracy in the Gulf of Aden is presently commanded by Rear Admiral Najat, Admiral Najat, and Inarish is his last name. And he, in fact, will be relieved next week by Pakistan. And then upon arrival, Task Force 152, the task force responsible for maritime security within the Arabian Gulf itself, was commanded by Jordan. And incredibly effectively, I might add, also too. I might also add it was a Jordanian 05 that was in command of that task force. And then he has been relieved now by Captain Ali of the Royal Saudi Border Guards. And so, in fact, over my tenure, of the 6 individual commanders of those task force during that time, the only one that stood out as a Western power was Canada, who will be assuming command of CTF 150 here in January, as the foreign minister explained. And so, I'll follow up with you a little bit on that, but I challenge the premise of that question, but I don't challenge the idea behind it and just how important it is. And it underscores an importance of partnerships. And so implicit within your question is the notion somehow of a paternalistic West that is commanding at the operational level, on top of the fact that it's not true. What I'm talking about command is not lip service either. They've got, for a mariner, knowing the seas that you're in, is that I'm not going to feel at home in the northwestern Indian Ocean, in the Arabian Gulf, in the North Arabian Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, in the same way that I feel at home in the Atlantic. They're going to bring particular elements to the operation. Notwithstanding also is just the feeling of the history that courses through the veins. The deep knowledge of the historical relationships are absolutely irreplaceable. What we achieve with this 33-nation coalition is a diversity that goes way, way deeper than the surface and how people look. It's that combination of experience, ideas, thoughts, cultural experiences, education that makes a steely alloy that can cut without chipping, that can bend without breaking, that's stronger than any metal, if I can use a metallurgy example for what we achieve with that coalition. So A, your question's wrong, and B, your idea is great, and thank you. And for Dr. David Gordon, if I may, shall I answer the integration and operation of the IRGCN and IRN?
Yep.
There was an old idea that somehow the IRIN was the old professional Navy that operated at sea. They were vestigial to the Pahlavi regime. they harbored secret Western biases, and that the IRGCN were, the pure to the revolution Navy that executed uniquely in their sea in the parts that were more important to them. 41 years into the revolution, I think we can dispense with that notion, is that anyone who was in the Navy during the Pahlavi regime is probably 10 years older than me. And for me, the hour draws nigh. So, I sincerely doubt there's a difference among them. The battle space for Iran is effectively divided into districts with established command and control nodes that seeks to gain maritime domain awareness and operate at sea. The IRIN is more focused on deeper water, and the two districts are those districts by Chabahar and by Jask, and they extend into the deeper seas, and they employ the deeper draft vessels that are operated, and the districts within the Arabian Gulf are more focused on fast attack craft that are more conducive to shallower waters and the kind of mission sets that they are oriented on. But while maintaining a deterrent posture against them, and while executing our own professionalism in contrast to theirs, we have respect, a healthy respect, as any military person will have for this particular adversary. Sorry to have gone so long, John.
No problem. Thank you very much. General Sinik?
No, thanks. And I won't touch on either of those two issues. I'll talk first of all about the question related to integration. And the answer is, I think, that one needs to recognize that you won't make the integration occur unless you've really been quite disciplined about how you establish the protocols for the way you manage data. And I think for all of us, the big challenge is that our data is in a rather anarchic state, shall we say, at the moment. I mean, I was very interested going to visit Carlisle not so long ago, to where the US Army retains its archives. And of course, you can see some splendid archives contained in leather-bound books and on paper, where everybody knows exactly where everything is. And then there's a sort of a modern corner of the room where there are a whole load of hard drives and a large question mark. And of course, the extent to which you can genuinely achieve that effect will only be achieved if you can provide the discipline to data. General Stan McChrystal, who many of you will know, who spent much time in this region, always observed that what you were looking for was a flat information environment and a hierarchy of decision-making. And of course, that's the acme of success, I suspect, when we talk about how this integration is going to work. But it's going to be integration that is not just within the armed forces and the domains that I described. It's going to be, in our case, across government. And it's going to be with our intelligence agencies, but further afield than that. And that comes down to how you establish the protocols you need for the information you place on it, and then how that cloud, that digital backbone, is going to provide the wherewithal for that integration to occur. And then, of course, when you expand it outwards, like onion rings, to your allies, how you achieve international interoperability across allies is another challenge altogether. And that's something that is not going to happen, I think, in one big bang. It's going to be something that happens incrementally. But we all need to understand that in doing so, it hugely depends upon the protocols you establish to be able to make that effective. On the question associated with drones and proxies, yes, this is another evolution in the character of warfare. But of course, one needs to remember, as Admiral Sam observed, that of course warfare is an extension of politics by other means. And of course, one of the reasons why people are using these sorts of arm's length capabilities is they don't want to become entangled in these conflicts. They want to have a way out of it. They want plausible deniability. So if you can pin them down, then I suspect that is one of the ways in which you will outmaneuver them. I think we also need to learn the right lessons from the environments in which those drones and proxies are being used. Because, of course, Nagorno-Karabakh, whilst there are some urban areas, essentially was very much a rural campaign. And you can use those sorts of technologies in that environment in a more straightforward way. Personally, I think that if you get, God forbid, to serious warfare, it's going to be very much contained in urban areas. And the sorts of technologies you need and the sorts of tactics and techniques you need in urban areas will be fundamentally different to those that you need in the sort of rural areas. And then on the last question, associated with how you modernize and how you transition to, as it were, the information age of systems. I mean, the answer is that I often talk to try and stimulate debate within our armed forces about sunset and sunrise. And I talk about the characteristics associated with the sorts of capabilities that will be necessary for the sunrise. And of course, by having a list which you'll find contained in the integrated operating concept, which I'm afraid we will have bored you with by leaving it on your places in front of you, you will see the sorts of characteristics we're talking about. Now, I often talk about the challenge of moving from sunset to sunrise is how you shorten the night as much as you possibly can. The reality, of course, is it's going to be something that is done incrementally. It is going to be about a balance, because a lot of the industrial age platforms that ultimately will be sunsetted will have use, I suspect, below the threshold of war. They will have use in the sorts of campaigns that we see of today. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that's going to happen incrementally. And it'll be aimed at a relatively vague target. But I think the list of criteria that are contained in that concept will give you a sense of the sorts of things that we're aiming for and where one will therefore need to apply one's experimentation to achieve the answer.
Marvelous, thank you very much. And we heard yesterday from the Deputy Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Jordan that unfortunately many conflicts in the region, including Iraq, Syria, end up in Jordan. And we've heard today how important it is to have the regional voice on issues of defense, diplomacy, and modernization. So it's a real delight that we now have with us Major General Yousef Al-Huneiti, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Jordan Armed Forces, and I'd asked him to take the podium and address us. And for those whose familiarity with Arabic is 6 minutes, we'll invite you to take your headphones.
In the name of God, I start. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, God bless you all. I would like in the outset to address my thanks and appreciation to our brothers in the Kingdom of Bahrain for holding this high-level dialogue and for the good organization. Wishing you all success in your endeavor under the rulership of King His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa. We recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that the region has not known stability for different geopolitical, demographic, historical, ideological considerations. All contributed to make the region as a point of attraction and created a chronic status of competition and conflict. We also noted defense diplomacy pushing towards more tension sometimes and more stability in some other times. What the region witnessed in the past 10 years, lots of crises and conflicts with destruction and economic and social disasters paid for by the population of the region, and they still pay hardly for all these conflicts, including Jordan, who succeeded in managing the crisis of the Syrian refugees and could achieve a good balance between the humanitarian and security aspects through good use of flexible security diplomacy with coordination with the partners and international organizations and humanitarian organizations as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the crisis in the region proved that developing tracks of solutions in addition to dealing with COVID-19 all lead us to see and to recognize that we need a defense strategy through good use of this strategy that can lead to cooperation in a way that would sustain the interests of all and could contribute to developing solutions for the problems in the region and could develop good responses to different crises. We have a new concept in using defense diplomacy through making good use of our security and military relationships with our allies and partners in order to face Corona and to provide the necessities to contribute to enhancing food security, medical security, the establishment of field hospitals, and contributing to managing the crises with other institutions. This leads us to recognize the need in the region to make use of defense security to build a regional system in order to deal with different crises. We in Jordan, and in accordance with the vision of His Majesty King Abdullah on the need to control globalization, we need to have controls of the new security diplomacy through integration, because it's the only way to achieve balance. And we need to invest in the human resources in a way that would help us to meet the challenges and bridge the gaps so we can better face the threats and decrease the cost on the people of the region. We will be more capable of shouldering the responsibility in a region with increased threats and in light of many conflicts with higher levels of poverty, unemployment, and economic recessions. Ladies and gentlemen, necessity calls for deepening up our security diplomacy in a way that would contribute to equipping our region to face future challenges, especially in light of this transformational phase witnessed by the region. This initiates the need for a new status of diplomacy that takes into consideration the different types of diplomacy needed and the differences between the different people in all our efforts to increase development. We should build on foundation that is more resilient and capable of building a security society that can employ all connections in order to have a joint security concept in the Middle East region, taking into consideration that there are trans-border difficulties in the region. We cannot face the security threats without sharing expertise and information amongst the different countries of the region, in addition to expanding cooperation with the major powers. I would like, in conclusion, to thank you for giving me the opportunity to take part in this dialogue. Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum.
Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much indeed. I will take a couple more questions from the floor, and we do need to end before noon. But thank you, General, for those remarks. We really appreciate your presence with us, and our best wishes to all of those in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Thank you so much. Could I just ask then a couple from the floor, from the United States, E.J. Harold.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman, and thank you to all of our speakers for some fascinating remarks. It's really interesting to hear about defense diplomacy and modernization in this part of the world. And we've heard about the professionalism and courage of armed forces working together in concert. And that's, of course, fundamental to success. But cohesion is built on common practices and as well as a commonality or an interoperability of capabilities. And with modernization occurring at different paces among different nations of the world, and in particular, the two represented on the flanks of the stage, the UK and the US, modernizing with great speed and a lot of capability or finances put against it. How do we maintain this commonality of capacity in addition to the commonality of purpose and focus? So new forms of modern warfare mean new technologies. Export controls mean we don't want to give up our technical edge. How do we continue to work with allies and partners in an effective way in an era of diverging capacity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a question for Admiral Paparo from London, from the Senior Fellow for Naval Affairs from IISS, Nick Childs. Actually very interesting. The Secretary of the Navy, Braithwaite, has raised the prospect of reviving a U.S. First Fleet for the Western Pacific and Indian Ocean. How might that affect the posture of the Fifth Fleet and the U.S. ability to maintain a maritime deterrent posture in the Middle East? And final question from the floor, Imru Al-Qais Talat Jabril from Morocco.
Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chipman. I would like to make a comment and question to General Carter, and Vice Admiral Paparo is welcome to comment on it if he wishes to do so. So basically, I want to take the conversation a little bit away from the Middle East, because I'm from Morocco, and we tend to see ourselves as not Middle Eastern, basically. And if we think about purely security perspective or realpolitik, we tend to see the closest nuclear power to us as being France. So, you know, that is actually our security threat from that perspective. So I want to bring the conversation to the Atlantic, and I want to see how US and UK military planning actually sees this region, especially the Southern Atlantic, which I think will be even more important. So I'm kind of forward-looking here in terms of food security, but also if you think about internet sea cables, which we rely on so much, and also if you think about narcotic and weapons trading that happens in the Southern Atlantic through Guinea-Bissau and then goes into the Sahel, which ultimately actually affects the Mediterranean and by extension the UK, right? So I would like to know from a UK perspective, how do you see the Southern Atlantic going into the medium to long term? What are your contingency planning for this actual region, given that, in my opinion, it will also affect the Middle East in a great manner? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll ask Sam Paparo first, and we'll close with General Nick. If you still have any comments, we're happy to have them. But for the moment, Sam, I think essentially the question was, could there be interoperability between the First Fleet and the Fifth Fleet for you?
There most certainly will be, is the question to that. And so first to the question of individual fleets is that the manner in which the United States subdivides its own operations throughout the world is probably familiar to almost everyone here in the room, is the Unified Campaign Plan, which is how forces are subdivided around the world. And the Middle East, and you know, specifically South Asia, the northwestern Indian Ocean, and the upper Levant, Iraq, Iran, and so forth, that whole swath, including Central and South Asia, are the operations therein for American forces. This does not connote any dominion over this geography, is commanded at U.S. Central Command, and the remainder of the Indian Ocean for U.S. vessels and forces that are operating it are commanded at U.S. Indo-PACOM. But as I said the other day, if you were to strike the term Middle East out of your lexicon, you'd have completely different discussion of these parts of the world altogether. As a naval officer, your key geography is always bifurcated or trifurcated by terrestrial lines, because human beings live on land and because warfare is a people-oriented operation. So naval officers are uniquely qualified for operating and connecting across those boundaries. As Secretary Brathwaite explained, the First Fleet was to be an expeditionary fleet that was ready in the case that there were operations in the Indian Ocean excluding this AOR. At the face of it, it would seem like it was yet another competing demand signal for American forward deployed forces as we have here. But I don't see it this way. In fact, our doctrine of dynamic force employment is designed to bring force, and naval force is inherently mobile to the point of need. And so I don't see any Pareto optimality between the First Fleet as it is imagined and the Fifth Fleet as it is stationed here and operating. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so very much. Well, we're pretty joint here. We have Army, Navy, and Air Force on the stage, so we're not doing too badly. There are a couple of domains that we're still battling with, including the cyber domain. But thank you very much for that. Towards General Sir Nick, then, I guess you're stuck with the question of how a U.S. that is moving at pace permits the UK still to be technologically interoperable with its principal ally, and I guess you have to pick up the question of France, North Africa, and all parts of the Atlantic. So take those two, and we'll close soon after that.
No, thanks, John. I think, yes, on the question about commonality of capacity in line with commonality of objective, I think one of the interesting things when I talk to my US interlocutors about the way the UK relates to the United States is that one of the advantages that we have over the United States is that we're a lot smaller. And we're also, I think, therefore able in many ways to be quite well knitted together and quite agile in terms of the way we do capability development. And certainly I occasionally get the odd envious look from the United States as to how we can do things in a way that is more agile. But of course, mass has an advantage all of its own. The answer is, I think, so much of it comes down to training and exercising together and genuine interoperability. So much of it comes down to how you share information. There's a lot of waffle about special relationships, but the relationship that really matters is the way in which you share information, because that's the way in which you build the necessary protocols to enable you to modernize together in the same way and in the same direction. And on the question of the Atlantic and all that comes with that, I mean, I think this is in many ways, from a UK perspective, it's a big question about how we value some of our critical infrastructure, our critical national infrastructure. And your observation about undersea cables is pretty fundamental. And of course, that is a vulnerability, and it's a vulnerability that we need to think really hard about how we protect it. And that's a problem for the Northern Atlantic, but it's also a problem for the Southern Atlantic. And of course, this is one of the reasons why an investment in a carrier capability is useful from our perspective, because one of the other things that comes with our relationship with the United States, I think, is a desire to burden share in a constructive way. And the ability for the UK to use a carrier group within the Atlantic is a very helpful thing in terms of the way that we might view this problem. Of course, we still have a base in Gibraltar, not that far from Morocco, as you well know. And I think that all of us are showing quite a lot of interest in the Gulf of Guinea now, not least because many of the problems that we've seen in the Indian Ocean, and for that matter, south of Aden, are problems that are manifesting themselves in the Gulf of Guinea as well. So we understand that problem. And I think in combination with the French, we will work pretty closely to see how we can improve the security circumstances and the stability around the Gulf of Guinea. So I think the long and the short of it is that it is not something that we are ignoring. We absolutely understand the importance of the Atlantic, and particularly the South Atlantic. And we also absolutely understand the importance of the Maghreb and how that plays into the broader security of the region. So we empathize entirely with where you're coming from, and we recognize the challenges of protecting what is really quite fundamental infrastructure to our way of life.
Well, that's been absolutely marvelous. Thank you very much. I think an important military principle is maintenance of the aim. An important military principle is also to be flexible and agile. I hope you all agree that all of us here have been flexible and agile while maintaining the aim. We've had a phenomenal session this morning on defense diplomacy and defense modernization. I want you all to thank our three panelists and return to the room at 12:30 for our concluding session, which I think will be equally special to all the ones we've already had. But for now, please thank our three speakers. Thank you very much.